Have you ever wondered why the quietest moments in life often feel the most profound? Why some people retreat into silence, not out of fear or sadness, but to find something deeper? We live in an age of noise, notifications, headlines, conversations layered over conversations, and yet, in all of this sound, many of us feel disconnected from others, from meaning, from ourselves. Today we explore a quiet rebellion, not of protests or revolutions, but of stepping away into solitude, into silence, into the place where the self begins to speak. This is a journey into the philosophical power of being alone. To choose solitude in a world obsessed with connection is radical. But let's begin by making a distinction. Solitude is not loneliness. Loneliness is the ache of disconnection. Solitude is the art of intentional separation, where loneliness feels like being exiled from the world. Solitude is a conscious retreat from it, not to escape, but to observe, not to hide, but to rediscover. Henry David Thoreau said, "I never found a companion that was so companionable as solitude." He wasn't being antisocial, he was being awake, because solitude in its purest form isn't a prison, it's a sanctuary. Carl Jung believed that true transformation begins when we confront what we've ignored. He called it the shadow, the unconscious aspects of ourselves we refuse to see. And here's the uncomfortable truth: we can't meet the shadow while distracted. Solitude forces us into confrontation with the mirror, with the truth. No filters, no audience, just the raw, unedited you. And at first that silence is terrifying. We want to scroll, to call someone, to do anything but sit still. But Jung tells us, who looks outside, dreams, who looks inside, awakens. Solitude is the gateway to awakening. Modern life is structured to prevent solitude. We're addicted to feedback loops, likes, comments, affirmations. We outsource our self-worth to algorithms. But silence has no algorithm, no approval, no applause, which is exactly why it's powerful. Nietzsche once said, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." The tribe isn't always malicious, but it is loud. It tells you what to want, how to behave, who to be. But in solitude, the tribal voice weakens, and your own voice begins to emerge. At first it's just a whisper, but with time it becomes something else, a compass. There's a sacredness to being alone that our culture doesn't teach us. We treat time alone like a problem to be solved, a gap to be filled. But what if it's not a gap? What if it's the doorway to the part of you that doesn't need performance? Philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." That wasn't a complaint, it was a diagnosis. In solitude, the masks fall away. The inner world, often ignored, becomes illuminated, and you begin to realize you are not the role you play, not the job title, not the expectation. You are something far deeper, and solitude is how you begin to meet it. Once you've sat with yourself long enough, something strange happens. The things you used to chase feel less urgent, validation less magnetic, approval less addicting. You start living from something instead of for something. This is the foundation of authenticity. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard said, "The crowd is untruth." He didn't mean that everyone is wrong, but that truth is not found in consensus. Truth is personal. It's cultivated alone, and then carried back into the world, because solitude is not forever. The purpose isn't to escape society, but to return to it with something real, something of your own. To embrace solitude is to commit a quiet rebellion. It is to turn away from noise, not with resentment, but with clarity. It's not about becoming a monk or deleting every app. It's about presence. Can you sit in silence and hear yourself think? Can you go for a walk without headphones? Can you face a question without rushing for an answer? These small acts are radical today. They reclaim your inner life, and once reclaimed, that life becomes unshakable. Because the person who has made peace with themselves cannot be easily manipulated, or sold to, or broken. They've seen their own darkness, sat with their own fears, and emerged, not louder, but clearer. In a world screaming for your attention, choosing solitude is not retreat, it's a return to center, to clarity, to the self the world made you forget. So the next time life gets loud, consider getting quiet. You may just find that what you've been looking for was inside you, waiting to be heard. But why do some people seem to flourish in solitude, while others crumble beneath its silence? Carl Jung believed that solitude is not merely the absence of others, it is the presence of oneself. And if the self is fractured, avoided, or buried under a pile of distractions, solitude becomes unbearable. The silence turns into a scream. This is why many people are terrified of being alone, because in that aloneness, they are finally forced to meet the parts of themselves they've long ignored, the shadow, the buried pain, the uncomfortable truths. Solitude in this light is not an escape from the world, but a confrontation with the self. And so the real journey of solitude is not external but inward. It is not about shutting the door on others, but opening the door within. This is why solitude has always been the companion of mystics, monks, and thinkers, not because they hated the world, but because they needed to listen more deeply than the world allows. The Stoics too practiced solitude not as isolation but as preparation. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations about retreating into the inner citadel, that place within the soul where one can find peace, no matter the chaos outside. Solitude is where clarity lives, where the noise of expectation dies. It's where you strip away the social masks, the curated identities, and ask, who am I without all of this? It's in solitude that we realize how much of what we think we are is simply a reflection of what others think of us. Pause here for a moment. Ask yourself, how often do I sit in silence with my own thoughts? Not scrolling, not distracted, just being. If that thought feels unsettling, you're not alone, and yet that discomfort is the exact signpost pointing toward the shadow, the part of you that needs to be seen. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Solitude, when embraced deeply, becomes the stage for that radical self-acceptance. But this isn't easy, because the modern world treats solitude like a disease to be cured. We're always connected, always notified, always watching, or being watched. Solitude threatens the identity we've built around constant stimulation. Yet ironically, without solitude we never really know who we are. We're just reacting to people, to opinions, to pressures. We're never grounded in our own being. True solitude is not loneliness, it's sovereignty. It's the ability to sit with your pain and not need to drown it, to face your regrets and not run, to be simply who you are without apology. The irony is this: most people think they are afraid of being alone, but what they're really afraid of is being themselves. Not the self they show the world, but the self that emerges when no one is looking. The unfiltered self, the one with wounds, fears, contradictions, and maybe even a quiet longing for something more. Carl Jung's idea of individuation, the process of becoming whole, demands solitude, not optional solitude, but essential solitude, because it is only in the quiet that we can hear what is unfinished within us. This is where the shadow lives, in silence, in absence, in the places where the world no longer validates us. And the deeper truth: the more we run from solitude, the more we remain strangers to ourselves. We might build entire lives, relationships, careers, but all on top of a fragmented foundation, a performance, not a life. And here's the subtle tragedy: people who never face their own shadow are often the ones who project it onto others. The bitterness they feel isn't always about the world. Sometimes it's a reflection of the war within. Jung believed that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Think about that. What if the people who annoy you most are showing you something unresolved in you? What if the world is not simply a place of chaos but a mirror, reflecting the parts of ourselves we've disowned? This is why solitude matters. It allows us to pull back from the noise of projection, from the constant deflection of blame, from the endless distractions, and in that stillness we can finally ask, what is mine to carry? When we begin to see clearly, not just with our eyes but with our awareness, something shifts. We stop fighting the world, we stop chasing validation, and we begin walking the lonelier but far more honest path, the path back to ourselves. There is a kind of silence that isn't empty. It's full of insight, full of clarity, full of something deeper than words. This is the silence mystics speak of, the emptiness that Zen Buddhists call Mu, the stillness in which Meister Eckhart said, God is born in the soul. Jung may not have used spiritual language in the same way, but the heart of his message was similar. Go inward, face your depths, integrate your shadow, become whole, not perfect, whole. Because wholeness doesn't mean light without darkness, it means light that has befriended its darkness, and that meeting often happens in solitude. So maybe the next time life feels overwhelming or lonely or uncertain, don't rush to fill the silence. Maybe sit with it. Maybe ask, what part of me have I not listened to? What truth is waiting to be heard when the noise fades? Because Jung knew this truth, the world will always try to pull you outward, but your soul, it waits inward, and the longer you avoid it, the louder it will whisper, until one day you realize that the thing you were running from was not loneliness, it was your own awakening. So here is the invitation, not to isolate, not to withdraw, but to choose deliberately, the kind of solitude that heals rather than wounds. Step away from the noise, not out of bitterness but out of reverence for yourself. Because you are not meant to be a copy of the world, you are not meant to drown in its expectations, you are meant to become whole. And to do that you must, at least for a time, walk the path alone, not because no one understands you, but because in solitude you begin to understand yourself. The journey inward is not linear, it's a labyrinth, and just like the myth of the Minotaur, somewhere at the center of that twisting maze is a beast, not a literal monster, but the raw ancient parts of ourselves we've buried, the rage we've suppressed, the grief we never processed, the guilt we've covered with pride. These are not enemies, they are signals. Jung would say that our neuroses, the things that disturb us, depress us, or haunt us, are not just symptoms to be eliminated, they are messages. They are fragments of the self that want to be heard, but they cannot speak clearly when we are constantly distracted, constantly stimulated, constantly scrolling, swiping, numbing. Solitude isn't always peaceful, sometimes it's disorienting, uncomfortable, even terrifying, but that's because it's working. It's stripping away the illusion of control, it's revealing what lies beneath the surface, and underneath that, there's something sacred, a kind of truth that can't be taught, only encountered. Now let's pause and make an important distinction. Solitude is not the same as isolation. One is chosen, the other is imposed. Isolation is disconnection. It's the painful belief that we are cut off, that no one can understand us, and perhaps no one wants to. But solitude is sacred. Solitude is empowered. It's the conscious act of stepping away from the crowd to hear the voice that lives within. Jung's entire philosophy was built around the idea that healing comes through integration, and to integrate the shadow, to unify the conscious with the unconscious, you must first encounter it. You cannot encounter your depths if you are always accompanied by the noise of others' opinions. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is turn your phone off, sit in a quiet room and simply ask, who am I? Beneath the roles, the masks, the expectations. In a world obsessed with achievement, Jung's message was almost rebellious. Go inward. Don't just climb the ladder. Ask if it's leaning against the right wall. Don't just fix the outer world. Heal the inner one. The real revolution begins not in institutions or ideologies, but in awareness, and awareness by its very nature is born in quiet. This is why so many people fear solitude, because once you begin to see, you can no longer pretend, you can no longer distract yourself with busy schedules and shallow conversations. You have to face the truth, that some of the things you were chasing were never yours to begin with. Jung didn't shy away from suffering. He believed that suffering, when approached consciously, could be transformative, not something to glorify, but something to understand. He once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain, and solitude at its most honest confronts us with that pain. But here's the paradox. By embracing it, by sitting with it, we begin to dissolve it. Pain becomes less of an enemy, and more of a doorway, a threshold, a rite of passage into depth, into meaning, into maturity. In a sense, solitude is the crucible where we burn away what is false and uncover what is real.
But here's the beauty of the journey. Solitude is not the end, it's a preparation. You don't go into the cave to stay there forever. You go so you can return, more whole, more aware, more yourself. The true self does not emerge through applause or approval. It emerges through reflection. And once you've found even a glimpse of it, you begin to live differently. You speak with more truth. You listen with more patience. You choose with more intention. And perhaps most importantly, you stop trying to escape yourself, because now you know who lives behind your eyes, and that person, they are not your enemy, they are your origin. Most people live from the outside in. They wait for the world to tell them who they are, what they're worth, what they should want. But Jung's vision was the opposite. Live from the inside out. Begin with depth, with soul, with silence, and from that center, let your life unfold, not as a performance but as a practice of authenticity. Because when you know who you are in solitude, no one can define you. And when you've made peace with your shadow, no one can control you. And when you've heard your own soul speak, not even the loudest voices of the world can drown it out.
2. Solitude, in its truest form, is not an escape from life. It's a re-entry into it. You don't step away to disconnect. You step away to reconnect, not just with yourself, but with what truly matters. Because when the noise dies down, when the static clears, something remarkable happens. You begin to hear the subtle music of your life again. Not the clamor of the marketplace, not the scripts handed down by family or society, but the quiet pulse of what you actually want, what actually matters to you. In that stillness you realize that so much of what once seemed urgent isn't, that so much of what you feared losing was never yours to begin with. But let's be honest, we live in a culture that wages war on solitude. We are conditioned to avoid silence, to feel uneasy the moment a conversation lapses, to check our phones when we're alone in a room, standing in line, or even walking down the street. And that's not an accident. It's design, because a distracted mind is easier to market to. A person who fears their own thoughts is more likely to seek comfort in consumption, and a society that fears solitude is one that will always stay on the surface. Jung's work, though rooted in psychology, was revolutionary in this way. It reminded us that depth, not speed, not scale, not performance, is the real path to healing. When you are alone long enough, not in boredom, but in receptivity, the unconscious begins to speak. It doesn't speak in words, it speaks in images, in strange dreams, in recurring thoughts, in moments that feel like déjà vu or intuition. And this is where the true work begins, interpreting the language of the soul. To Jung, dreams were not random static, they were oracles. The unconscious wasn't a trash bin of suppressed thoughts, it was a living intelligence, a part of you that sees what you cannot, and tries to show you, if you're willing to listen. But you can't hear that voice in a crowd, you can't feel it if you're numbing, you must make space. Because the unconscious doesn't scream, it whispers. What if you're not broken? What if all those fragments, the fear, the anger, the confusion, are not signs that something's wrong with you, but invitations? What if every painful emotion is a doorway into deeper self-understanding? Jung believed that the goal of life wasn't perfection, it was wholeness, and to become whole, you must be willing to meet yourself fully, not just the parts you like, not just the roles you perform well, but the forgotten child, the hidden rage, the sacred sadness, the irrational joy, all of it. Because you cannot cherry-pick your humanity and expect to be at peace, you have to embrace it all. Being alone is not a weakness, it's a practice, a muscle we've let atrophy. But when we rebuild it, we find something astonishing: clarity, direction, a sense of meaning that doesn't come from a trending hashtag or a viral post, but from a deep, ancient knowing within. This isn't a retreat from life, it's a radical form of participation in it. Because once you've made peace with yourself, you stop chasing so much, you stop proving, you stop performing, and instead, you begin to live, from essence, from truth, from stillness. Eventually you return, you re-enter the world, You talk with friends, you answer emails, you buy groceries. But something has shifted. The world no longer defines you. You no longer lose yourself in other people's stories, because you've tasted something more enduring, a self rooted in silence, a self forged in solitude. And from that root, your presence changes. You speak more slowly. You listen more deeply. You move through chaos without losing your center. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to win to feel worthy. Because the voice you trust most now is your own.